My sister walked into that shoe store, believing it would be just another forgettable moment in her day. Nothing important, nothing dramatic, just a stop between one task and another. The kind of place you enter without expecting your life to shift even a little. The store looked refined, carefully designed to appear welcoming, while quietly deciding who truly belonged there. Bright lights reflected on the spotless floor, and the smell of new leather filled the air, clean and sharp. She paused for a second at the entrance, not because she felt insecure, but because she always took a breath before entering closed spaces. A habit. Then she stepped inside. At first, everything seemed normal. A few customers were browsing silently. Boxes were stacked neatly behind the counter. Music played softly, almost too softly. My sister adjusted her bag on her shoulder and walked toward the displays, observing the shoes with genuine interest. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't wandering aimlessly. She was there to buy something for herself, something she had planned and saved for. Then she felt it, that uncomfortable sensation of being watched. Behind the counter stood a female employee, leaning slightly forward, her eyes fixed on my sister, not in a professional way, not with curiosity or readiness to help. It was a slow, measuring stare, moving from her shoes to her clothes to her face, and back again, the kind of look that silently asks questions it has already answered. My sister noticed it but chose to ignore it. She had learned over the years that responding to silent judgment often only feeds it. So she kept walking. She stopped at a shelf, picked up a pair of shoes, elegant, neutral, nothing flashy, and turned it in her hands to check the price tag. That's when the voice came. That one doesn't come in your size. The sentence was thrown from a distance without warmth, without effort. My sister turned around, surprised. You didn't even ask what my size is, she said calmly, politely. The employee sighed, visibly annoyed, and crossed her arm. You can tell, she replied. And that model is expensive. It's from the new collection. The words hung in the air longer than they should have. My sister felt her chest tighten, as if the space around her had suddenly shrunk. A couple nearby stopped moving. One woman glanced over quickly, then looked away. Another man pretended to be deeply interested in a pair of boots. No one said anything. I just wanted to try it on, my sister said, still holding on to her composure, though her voice was beginning to betray her. The employee stepped closer, lowering her voice as if sharing advice. But there was no kindness in it. Sometimes it's better to look for something that matches your profile. This store has a different type of customer. That was the moment when something inside my sister cracked. It wasn't anger. It wasn't shock. It was a quiet, deep humiliation. The kind that doesn't explode, but sinks. She suddenly became aware of her hands, of her breathing, of how loud her heartbeat sounded in her ear. She realized she was no longer seen as a customer, but as a mistake that had walked through the wrong door. She could have argued. She could have demanded respect. She could have asked for a manager. She didn't. Slowly, carefully, she placed the shoe back on the shelf, exactly where it belonged. The gesture was calm, almost ceremonial, as if she were restoring order in a space that had just tried to strip her of dignity. She turned and walked toward the exit. Each step felt heavier than the last, but her posture remained upright. Her head stayed high. No one stopped her. No one apologized. The silence followed her like a shadow. As she reached the door, she heard the employee's voice again, low but sharp, meant to be heard. At least she left without making a mess. That was the final cut. Outside, my sister stopped on the sidewalk. The noise of the street rushed back into her ears. Too loud, too sudden. Her hands were shaking now. Her throat tightened, and her eyes burned with unshed tears. She stood there, frozen, holding herself together by force alone. She didn't cry, not yet. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and stared at the screen for a few seconds. Then she made a call, and the person she called was someone the employee inside that store would never have imagined was connected to her. Someone who would change everything. My sister stood there on the sidewalk for a long moment. After the call connected, she didn't rush to speak. She needed to breathe first, to make sure her voice wouldn't betray how deeply she had been shaken. The city moved around her like nothing had happened. Cars passed, people walked by. Life continued, indifferent to the quiet collapse that had just taken place inside her. "Can you come here?" she finally said. There was no confusion on the other end of the line. No hesitation. "Where are you?" the man asked, his tone already serious. "In front of your store." That was all it took. What most people never knew, and what the employee inside the store could never have imagined, was that the owner of that place was not a distant figure to my sister. He wasn't just a businessman with keys and authority. He was someone woven into her past, someone who had known her long before polished floors, price tags, and appearances mattered. They had grown up together. Same neighborhood, same dusty streets, same afternoons, spent sharing snacks that barely filled their stomachs, but somehow filled their days. He knew her family. He knew her values. He knew the kind of person she was. Quiet, strong, dignified. Someone who would never exaggerate a story or play the victim. 5 minutes later, his car pulled up to the curb. He stepped out slowly, but the tension in his body was impossible to miss. His eyes scanned her face immediately. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't look toward the store yet. He walked straight to her and wrapped his arms around her in a tight, steady embrace. It was the kind of hug that doesn't try to fix anything. It simply holds you together. She didn't cry, but she leaned into him, just for a second longer than usual. When he finally pulled back, his expression had changed. The softness was still there, but beneath it lived something sharper, something protective. "Tell me everything," he said quietly. She did. She told him about the look, the tone, the words chosen carefully to wound without shouting. She repeated the sentence about her profile. She described the moment she realized she was no longer seen as a customer, but as someone who didn't belong. As she spoke, his jaw tightened. His hands curled slowly into fists at his sides. Not rage, control, the kind of anger that doesn't explode, but settles in, cold and deliberate. Inside the store, time passed differently. The employee laughed with another coworker behind the counter. She felt satisfied, confident, certain she had done nothing wrong. In her mind, she had protected the brand. She straightened a box, adjusted a display, and went on with her shift, unaware that the foundation beneath her certainty was already cracking. The door opened. The owner stepped inside. The change in the atmosphere was immediate and unmistakable. Conversations died mid-sentence. A customer stopped walking. The music seemed suddenly too loud, then too quiet. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush. He walked to the center of the store and spoke clearly. "Who assisted the woman who just left a few minutes ago?" The employee looked up, surprised but still confident. She raised her hand. "I did." He turned to face her fully. "That woman is my best friend," he said. "And you humiliated her." The smile vanished from her face. "I didn't humiliate anyone," she replied quickly. "I was just doing my job. We have standards here." He took a slow breath. "Yes, we do. And those standards start with respect." She tried to explain herself, talked about the store's image, about certain customers expecting a specific environment, about how some people don't fit that environment. Each word made the silence heavier. "You judged her," he said. "You made assumptions about her worth before she even spoke, and you used this store as an excuse to do it." "That's not what I meant," she said, her voice losing strength. "Intent doesn't erase impact," he replied. He paused for a moment, letting his words settle into the room. "You're dismissed," he said finally, effective immediately. The store went completely silent. The employee stood frozen, unable to respond. No one defended her. No one spoke for her. The authority she believed she had dissolved in seconds. From the doorway, my sister watched. She didn't smile. She didn't feel triumph. What she felt was something quieter and deeper, the slow return of dignity. She realized then that the humiliation she carried out of that store no longer belonged to her. It had shifted, and this time, it wouldn't be ignored. My sister didn't go home immediately after everything happened. She stayed nearby for a while, sitting on a bench across the street, watching people enter and leave the store as if nothing extraordinary had taken place. The world had a strange way of continuing even when something inside you had shifted. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A message, then another, then several more. Someone inside the store had witnessed everything. A woman who had been standing just a few feet away when the words were spoken. A woman who recognized that familiar silence, the kind that follows humiliation when no one intervenes. She had gone home and written about it, calmly, carefully, without insults or exaggeration, just the truth. The post didn't mention names at first. It didn't need to. It described the look, the tone, the phrase about profile, the way the customer had left without being defended, and it asked a simple question at the end. How many times has this happened? And we stayed quiet. People responded faster than anyone expected. Comments began to fill the screen, dozens, then hundreds. I've been treated like that before. This happened to me in a clothing store. They look at you and decide you don't belong. Story after story surfaced. Different city, different stores, same feeling. My sister read every single one. At first it hurt. Each comment reopened something old. Something she thought she had already learned to live with. But slowly something else emerged. Recognition, connection, a deep understanding that the humiliation she felt wasn't personal. It was systemic, repeated, shared. She wasn't alone. Inside the store, the mood had changed. Customers whispered to each other. Employees avoided eye contact. The absence of the dismissed employee felt heavier than her presence ever had. The owner addressed the staff quietly, firmly. He made it clear that what had happened was not a misunderstanding. It was a violation of everything the store claimed to stand for. Later that evening, he posted a public statement. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't polished. It was honest. He apologized, not in a corporate way but in a human one. He acknowledged the harm. He took responsibility, and he made it clear that respect was not optional. Not for customers, not for employees, not for anyone. The response was immediate. Some praised him, some remained skeptical, but most people recognized something rare: accountability without excuse. That night my sister lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easily. Her body was exhausted, but her mind refused to slow down. Every moment replayed itself. The store, the words, the silence, the hug on the sidewalk, and then something unexpected happened. The shame loosened its grip. For the first time since walking out of that store, she felt lighter, not because the pain had disappeared but because it no longer lived only inside her. It had been named, seen, shared. A few days later she returned to the store, not to buy anything, not to prove anything, just to close the door gently on a chapter that deserved an ending. The owner was there. He looked tired but resolute. When he saw her he didn't smile immediately. He stood up and walked toward her slowly, as if making sure he chose the right word. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not as a business owner, as a person." She nodded. "I know," she replied, "and thank you for doing the right thing when it mattered." They sat for a while talking like they used to when they were younger, about life, about how easy it is to hurt people without realizing it, about how hard and necessary it is to stop that cycle. As my sister left the store that day, the space felt different, not perfect, but honest. The humiliation that once echoed between those walls had lost its power, because silence no longer protected it. The former employee sat alone, in her apartment that night, surrounded by a silence she wasn't used to. No background music, no coworkers laughing, no customers to impress or dismiss, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and her own thoughts, louder than she expected. Her uniform was folded on the chair across the room. She hadn't thrown it away yet. Losing the job hadn't fully settled in. It didn't feel real. Not yet. She replayed the moment over and over in her head. The owner's voice, calm but unmovable. The way the room had gone silent. The looks from her coworkers. Not angry looks, not sympathetic ones either, just distant. She sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed her hands together. A nervous habit she'd had since she was young. At first her thoughts were defensive. "I was just doing my job. I didn't mean it that way." That's how things work in places like that. But the longer the silence stretched, the weaker those arguments sounded. She stood up and walked toward the mirror in the hallway. Without the uniform, without the polished posture she wore at work, she looked smaller, tired, human. She stared at her own reflection, waiting for something: anger, maybe, or justification. Instead, memory surfaced. She remembered being 16, walking into a store with her mother, feeling invisible as the salesperson spoke only to someone else. She remembered the heat in her face then, the way her shoulders had curled inward, without her noticing. She remembered telling herself she would never let anyone treat her that way again. Somewhere along the line, that promise had twisted. She remembered her first day at that job, how proud she had been to wear the uniform, how important it made her feel, how being inside had felt safer than being the one looked at from the outside. Power had crept in quietly, not power over money or decisions, but power over judgment, the ability to decide who deserved warmth and who didn't, who belonged and who didn't, and she had used it. The realization didn't arrive like a dramatic breakdown. There were no tears, just a slow, uncomfortable awareness settling into her chest. She had become the voice she once hated. Across the city, my sister had no idea any of this was happening. She wasn't thinking about the employee anymore. Her pain had already begun to transform into something else. Reflection, strength, distance. But for the woman behind the uniform, that night marked a fraction. She didn't reach out. She didn't apologize publicly. Pride still stood in the way. Fear too. But something shifted internally. The certainty she once had about types of people cracked open. Days passed. She applied for other jobs, went to interview, found herself on the other side of the counter again, waiting to be evaluated by strangers. And every time someone looked at her too quickly, too coldly, she felt a familiar ache. This time she recognized it, and it stayed with her. Not as punishment, as memory, as a reminder of who she never wanted to be again. Sometimes growth doesn't come with redemption arcs or public apologies. Sometimes it comes quietly, in uncomfortable self-recognition, carried forward into choices no one else will ever witness. That was her consequence. In her lesson, time passed, not enough for the memory to fade, but enough for it to change shape. What stayed with my sister wasn't the employee's face, or even her words. What stayed was the moment she realized how easy it is for dignity to be challenged, and how powerful it is when it's reclaimed. She noticed it in small things, the way she walked into places now, shoulders relaxed, but head high, the way she no longer rushed to prove she belonged, the way she allowed silence to exist, without feeling the need to shrink inside it. She understood something deeply important. Dignity doesn't come from being accepted. It comes from refusing to accept less than respect. People around her noticed the change, even if they couldn't name it. She spoke a little less, but with more certainty. She listened more, but tolerated less. What once might have broken her confidence had, paradoxically, reinforced it. That day in the store still lived in her memory, but it no longer lived in her body. And that made all the difference. Sometimes we expect justice to be loud, public, dramatic. We imagine apologies delivered with trembling voices, or consequences that feel perfectly balanced against the harm done. But justice doesn't always arrive that way. Sometimes it arrives as acknowledgement, sometimes as accountability, sometimes simply as the quiet restoration of self-worth. The store continued operating. Customers came and went. New employees were hired. But something fundamental had shifted within those walls. Conversations were different. Training was different. Awareness existed, where ignorance once lived comfortably. The owner never spoke about the incident casually. He didn't use it as a story of redemption. He treated it as what it was, a reminder of responsibility. He knew now, more than ever, that leadership wasn't about image. It was about the environment you allow to exist under your name. As for my sister, she never returned to that store as a customer again. She didn't need to. Closure didn't require stepping back into the same space. It required knowing that she had not stayed silent, that she had honored herself without becoming cruel in return. In that matter, I watched all of this from close enough to feel it myself. I learned that humiliation doesn't always come screaming. Sometimes it arrives quietly, wrapped in politeness, disguised as standards or profiles, and because it's quiet, it's often allowed to pass unchallenged. But I also learned something else. Silence is not the same as peace, and dignity is not something anyone else gets to grant or deny. The world will always have doors that feel heavier to open, rooms where the air changes when you walk in, eyes that decide before listening. But those moments don't define who we are. How we leave them does. My sister walked out of that store without shouting, without breaking anything, without becoming smaller or harder. She walked out carrying herself wounded, Yes, but and that is the part of the story that matters most. Not the humiliation, but what survived it.